How's it going, everyone? And welcome all in for another episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. We are one full week into the college basketball season, and there's a lot of feelings already to be had about what we have seen in week one. Some highs, some lows, and a lot of maybe optimism with a few other teams in the league so far. We'll talk about what's coming up this week later on in the show. We'll talk about our power rankings and where we have everybody at this stage. But we have to have some gut check reactions to what we saw in week one. And Thomas, what were some of your first impressions of week one of the WCC season?
So I know they didn't really play like a bunch of high-powered teams, but they have beaten who is in front of them, and we deserve to give them credit after we've been piling on throughout all of our preview shows. Shout out Portland, all right. Let's have some respect for Shantae Leggins. We heard Jermaine Balasegar-Webb at WCC Media Day said it doesn't matter what we think, it matters what they think, what they're going to go prove themselves right. And yes, are they playing behemoth? Have they been playing behemoths? No. Have they been winning? That's more that can be said for some other teams in this conference. So I do want to give a lot of credit to Portland, the undefeated record so far, and I think some other guys like Joel Foxwell coming out in a coming out party, so to speak, WCC Freshman of the Week this week. So that was kind of cool to see and see some of that development take shape because we were trying to figure out where was some of that firepower going to come from. So give a quick shout out to the Pilots. I know there are a bunch of other teams that deserve some shout outs, and chief among them, the Zags, Santa Clara. Lots of teams that have done some good things, but just to start with, we do give some props, some earned one to Portland.
Absolutely. I mean, they were on my list of just kind of like the note taking. Again, they haven't beaten anybody really of note, but they handled their business against UC Davis, a team that a lot of people are usually, that's a solid team. That's not a pushover team from the Big West. You look at the fact that they're 3-0 after week one. Joel Foxwell averaging 17 points per game after his first week of collegiate play. There's a little bit of an Australian pipeline now going to Portland, not just St. Mary's at this point. You think about Austin Rapp last year, you have Joel Foxwell this year. So there's some optimism early on for Portland. Their week is, I mean, they only have one game this week. So I think it's actually even thinking about what they could potentially do. They're going to be at Wyoming at the end of the week. And, that's not a terribly good Wyoming team this year. And so, yes, tough road game, whatever else, but who knows? Maybe Portland can keep it rolling. But I mean, one of the other, I think, early impressions I had this week, and we'll get to like this, St. Mary's, yes, is on my list. San Francisco on my list. I'm looking at LMU because they went out and they didn't just beat teams, they crushed teams in their first two. And of course, like very much like we can talk about Portland, it's not like that they saw behemoths as well. They both did play Arkansas Pine Bluff in this first week, but you look at what LMU's doing. They're not just beating teams, they're really kind of running away from teams early on in this. And we've seen it come from a few different sources. MJ Amy really showing out in game one. Rodney Brown Jr. coming out really strong game two, career high 28 for him. And I like where LMU is defensively. And I think that was never a question. LMU's been good defensively. This is kind of who they are. It's whether or not the offense could come along with them. And so far, they're handling the business that they need to handle. And it is going to get a little tougher this week. And I think that's one of the things we have to look out with LMU. They're going to be at UTEP, and then they're going to coming back home for Troy. And for LMU, it's a matter of stacking up wins and gaining more of that confidence as they get closer and closer to league play. We talked about it in the preseason that they don't have the best non-conference, but this is a team that's fully capable of getting 9-10 wins before we get to league play. And they're really off to a good start. Again, we kind of like lead it off like two of the teams that are maybe not on the top of the attention bar, but Portland and LMU, like I think have raised some eyebrows, and you have to watch out for what these two have done.
And I'm glad you brought up MJ Amy because to start with, the one game that was sandwiched in all of it is that Eastern Washington game. Like LMU needed everything from about the 4 minute mark onward to finish that off. And MJ Amy basically put the team on his back. And you mentioned the offense. Will it come along for the ride? There was a world where Eastern Washington had taken a 5+ point lead and saying, oh boy, here we go. Is this where the flat tire commences for LMU? And then they find a way to get past it and then find a way to get the win and then take care of business after the fact. So, do a massive shout out to MJ Amy. And I do think once we get towards more of the heavy hitters right now, I do think massive credit to Gonzaga for what they did to Oklahoma, dressed them down in Spokane Arena. Lots of firepower, lots of intensity, and it was relentless too. It was very relentless. Good performance all around from lots of different guys. We know Tyron Grant Foster, Marlon St. Superi looking very good to start this season. So shout out to the Zags in doing so. And I know they lost, but shout out Pacific for what they did at Nevada. They had chances to win that game, had many chances down the stretch to win that game, and obviously the final putback is what sticks out. But Dave Smart and that team, they're learning how to win, and while they didn't get the job done there, I think it's a confidence building performance.
Yeah, I know that Dave Smart would say there's no such thing as the moral victories, so he's not going to be terribly happy with what we saw toward the end of that game. And but this team looks like they continue just they're incrementally getting better. They're more competitive. And the one thing about Pacific that I think has to be noted is last year they were awful from the 3-point line. They were like a 30% 3-point shooting team as a team that was next to last in the WCC. And so through 2 games this year, they're shooting 39% from three, and that is a massive improvement. Of course, only 2 games, need to see if it sustains, but that was something that looked like on paper that the Tigers had addressed. And I do think that they've addressed that in a lot of ways, that if they can shoot better, a lot of their games are going to be tighter. They're going to pull out a few more of these wins, and they're going to just be more competitive as we go. Now, one of the teams that we're talking about, I'm going to skip over to toward the top. And because I think one of the not to say surprise that they had the success that they did, but almost with the ease that they did it. And I have to talk about St. Mary's here because this was a team who had 2 very good teams come in St. Thomas and Chattanooga. Both are picked to win their respective conferences. And this is kind of how St. Mary's put the schedule together in the last few years, as you have a lot of heavy hitter in the mid-major realm. But it wasn't just that they went out and beat them. It's that they kind of suffocated both of these teams late in these contests. And it looked very much like the St. Mary's teams we have seen over the last few years, but with almost a completely different cast. You don't have the 2-time player of the year in Augustus Marshallonis. You don't have the 2-time defensive player of the year in Mitchell Saxon. You don't have a Luke Barrett. You don't have a Logan Johnson, a Kyle Bowen, Alex Dukas. You don't have any of these guys, but they have figured out a way with 4 brand new starters and a team that is finding, I think, a slightly different identity from what we have seen over the last few years, because this team offensively seems more dangerous than the teams of the last few years. And of course, we can talk about Paulos Morauskas and the improvement that he's made. He's averaging like 19 a game, 8.5 rebounds, 5 assists a game from the big man. But Mikey Lewis has made that jump. And I think there was a lot of not necessarily trepidation, but there was some questions of how good was he going to be in year 2, and how was his game going to adapt to defenses adapting to him. And really what we saw is that he's attacking the basket more. He's not relying as much on the 3, but he's been just as effective, if not more so, early on in these early contests. 25.5 points per game. He's shooting 58% from the field, 61% from 3. He's 15 for 15 from the free throw line. Mikey Lewis is very quickly making a case that maybe he's going to be in that player of the year conversation when we get to March. Of course, it's only 2 games. A lot still has to be proved, but I mean, this St. Mary's squad up and down, Andrew McKeever 10 rebounds a game. Like this team is, it seems like it's never a rebuild, it's always a reload for these Gales.
They can't keep getting away with this, man, and then they keep getting away with it, and that's why we keep giving the benefit of the doubt to Randy Bennett, and that's why even when we led for our initial questions before the season started, both for Gonzaga and for St. Mary's, these teams, these programs get the benefit of the doubt in trying to achieve what they're trying to go out to do. And St. Mary's through 2 games, absolutely proving us wrong. I mean, Kevin Gadd's getting minutes, Dylan Shaw showing some explosiveness. You mentioned Andrew McKeever, and I mean, it goes without saying what Mikey Lewis has been up to. And it's St. Mary's, they look like they got a little more pep in their step compared to years past. I think when you look at guys who can maybe do some things at the individual level, I think there's lots to like about what they've done. And you mentioned teams reading a defense and Mikey Lewis and how he's kind of like maneuvered himself the way defenses are playing him. I think the same holds true for a guy in a different role over across the bay and Ryan Beasley. And now the tide's going to turn. And there's no disrespect to other teams who also had good wins in Santa Clara and Oregon State. Like we'll give credit where that's due in terms of those departments. The balanced effort for the Broncos, some theatrics from Josiah like the second that resulted in WCC Player of the Week for the Beavers. But the USF Memphis game, this is where we're going to turn the tide here, Zach. What caused concern? USF got suffocated in that game. You want to talk about suffocation? They got down 23 before making that storm comeback towards the end before they didn't get to the top of the mountain. But the way the offense was put into disarray, the lack of secondary ball handling, and offensively, they just in the first half they were trying to will that 3-point shot in the basket to no avail. And I was extremely disappointed with what USF put out there. We have both been very adamant about what we think this team can do, and I was very disappointed with what I saw.
I think what we saw in the second half is why we were so disappointed in the performances, because you saw how quickly this team could crawl back into a game where they were down by 23 and got back within 5 late in that contest. This is not like USF. Clearly the talent is there and early on, and maybe this is something that gets adjusted as time goes on, but it was the physicality of Memphis that really bothered the Dons early in this one. Ryan Beasley really he looked shell-shocked a bit at the very beginning.
I was shocked. I was shocked. You were shocked. I mean,
5 points, 1 for 10 from the field. He fouled out of that game. Like, he did not look like himself at all. Like, he was bothered by their length, bothered by their speed, and he just didn't look like the Ryan Beasley we're used to seeing. But also, I mean, like, because this tide really didn't turn until we saw Mookie Cook enter the game, until we saw David Fuchs enter the game. And those two brought that physicality. They brought that energy. They brought that tenacity that in the first half they were missing. And I mean, Mookie Cook had 18 and 7, his only a second game for USF coming over from Oregon. Fuchs coming in off the bench. Like, these two really kind of like gave them that extra oomph that they needed to get back into it. And Tyrone Riley really didn't start to play the way we're used to seeing him until the second half as well. So I think the challenge, and this was something I brought up before the year, of what was going to happen with the interior, what was going to happen with the rebounding, how is this team going to address the fact that, well, they weren't terribly big overall. And first half, if there was a nightmare scenario, that was absolutely it. Like, they were bombarded on the boards. They looked out of place. They didn't look like they had a go-to guy offensively. And in the second half, that's the USF team I think we all thought that we would see from the get-go. So there's, I think, a number of things to take from that. It's that they are fully capable of being in these games with these teams and getting wins against these teams, but they have to be able to do it for 40 minutes. They did it for about 18, and that's not going to cut it against teams like this. The defense is still good enough to keep them in it, but they need the offense to come along for the ride. They need it more consistently. And of course, this is only game 2, a lot of basketball to be played. Can be overreaction Monday, whatever else.
It is
overreaction Monday. But looking at this USF team, thinking about their capabilities, I'm still positive about the Dons. I'm still like their chances in the long run, but this seems a little bit like the missed opportunity train all over again that the Dons have been on for the last few years.
Yeah.
And they have to be able to get over this hump against those teams. And they will have more opportunities. They're going to have more chances, but they are going to have to cash in on some of these and cannot get too far behind against teams like Memphis.
And part of the deal is, and you mentioned David Fuchs, so I thought it was really good in tone setting. Same with Mookie Cook. I do wonder how much in the future that Chris Gerlitson's ready to go to Fuchs right away over Guillermo Diaz-Graham, because he was completely absent throughout that game. I'd be intrigued to see the dilemma of going that way. And I think also what sticks out, maddeningly so, is the turnovers. Memphis is getting on the front foot, and then I believe it was Legend Smiley on the inbound just turns over right into the Memphis defender's hands, and I was just like, I mean, I get it's physicality for one thing, but if you're going to have mental mistakes compound that, it's like, what are we doing here? And that was the most discouraging part, and that's why we're so disappointed, because you mentioned those good 18 minutes. We know what this team can do, and we know what we think they can be. So when they put out something like that, it's just like, come on, guys! Like
a lot of unforced errors, a lot of things that they can fix and they should be able to remedy on their own. But yeah, USF did not have, that was not a good outing for the Dons. A game they should have won had they played a complete game, but they did not play a complete game. And here's where we are.
But they're not alone in that department.
Oh God, no, they are not. At least they played 18 minutes of a game, unlike the next team we're going to talk about, and that is Washington State, who is 0-2 to start the year, dropping the opener at home 83-81 to Idaho was bad, wasn't a good look, but then they went on the road and were never in it against Davidson. That game was over in the first, I would say, 8 minutes of that contest. I mean, this is a team that we questioned on a couple of fronts. I think we questioned them on different fronts. But Thomas, like, just, I mean, your initial read on what we saw from Washington State this first week.
So through 80 minutes of basketball, they have led for a grand total of 0 minutes and 0 seconds. I'm no mathematician, but I don't think you can win a basketball game doing that. So Washington State shooting 24% from three through 2 games. And you mentioned questions along different fronts. So from my perspective, it was, did they bring enough physicality without compromising their offensive identity? And right now, I think that's part of the dilemma that they're facing right now. I do think they've compromised it a little bit. And now you would hope the defense would be able to make up for some of that. It hasn't right now. They've given up, I believe they've given up 23 threes themselves through 2 games. So it's been really hard, and it's been really, I would say, really befuddling to see Washington State like this, because I think we know that they're better than they are, but it's just, we're trying to figure out why they're having to come up from so deep in the well. And that's probably the most discouraging part. And I'm not necessarily sure how course corrects, because they have a very capable St. Thomas team coming into town. And then beyond that, you got a lot of tough games hanging to the Maui.
Right. And I mean, Washington State, like, 83 points to Idaho, 85 points to Davidson. A Washington State team that we're kind of used to seeing, especially a David Riley team, really shoot it well. They're shooting 42% from the field. They're allowing their opponents to shoot 53% from the field. I think one of the glaring numbers here is actually the assist number. It's 16 assists per game for their opponents, 7.5 for Washington State. We're so used to seeing this free flowing offense that can really kind of find weapons wherever they are. And it has just not been the case early on for the Cougs. And you're right. Like this, and this is where my concern came in. It's that, yeah, this is a team that's learning. It's still, there's some question marks about the talent and how it was all going to fit together. And was it a schedule that was going to allow them to really figure it out? And really, it is not, because you already are down. You're 0-2 right now. You have a good St. Thomas team coming in. You then have Washington later in the week. You do get Southern Utah as the buffer, and then you go right into the Maui Invitational. And you want to hope that your first chance at a win is not then Chaminade in game 1 of the Maui, but this could be a quick 0-4 before they get to Southern Utah. And that's not a unrealistic thing to think about at this moment. St. Thomas, coming off of a win themselves after losing to St. Mary's on night one. Again, this is a team that's supposed to win the Summit League, and there a lot of people are bullish on what St. Thomas is capable of, maybe being the UC San Diego of this season. And if that's the type of team you're facing, if you're Washington State, even if you're hosting, this is a tough one for the Cougs, and I am concerned about where they are right now and just the lack of defense. And I don't know if it's just the lack of focus, if it's the roster construction or whatnot. But right now, Washington State is in need of a wake up call in some way, shape, or form. And hopefully, this first week was that wake up call because something needs to change before they go into this week.
Yeah, they got to find from both sides. They got to find more from the guards. I think that's where the buck starts and stops for them. I think they need more explosiveness. And to be honest, I don't know if the answer to that question is if they even do have it. So we're gonna have to kind of wait and see on that. And then you mentioned just the mental focus when it comes to those types of games. I mean, obviously, lots of new teams in this league that are breaking in new rosters, but Washington State kind of on the dip. You know, you compare it to like say Santa Clara or Oregon State who have figured it out. To this point in the season, where Santa Clara takes on a good McNeese team. Josh, let me make sure I get his last name right because I'm going to have to know it at some point. Sash Gavalugov, the transfer from Villanova, like he has a very balanced game. Josiah, like we mentioned already, Yak I know was benched for discipline reasons to start the UIC game, but can Oregon State get some more alongside Josiah like the second? Can we get more from Des White? But conversely, compared to Washington State, Oregon State is actually learning how to win. So I think that's the one. That's the really big dilemma right now. With you're seeing the fork in the road with a bunch of new rosters. Washington State not looking so hot. Santa Clara doing fine. Oregon State looking fine. And we haven't mentioned them yet in terms of disappointment. But as much as I like the Cal Poly team and the way they play, Seattle, you can't lose that. You just can't lose that, man. You just can't.
That was a heartbreaker for those who didn't see. Like Seattle lost to Cal Poly right at the buzzer there at the end on Saturday. They're 1-1 on the year. They did win. They did beat Denver on night one, who will be in the WCC next year. But yeah, losing to Cal Poly is not something that for a team that we have pretty high expectations of. That is a game, especially at home, you should not be losing that one. The defense is still, honestly, it feels like the defense has actually been a little bit behind the offense for Seattle U, which I think we thought it was going to be the other way around. I think we thought that the defense was going to kind of be the thing that carried this team throughout the course of the season. And it was not there the other night as much as we would like to see it but the Seattle offense has actually been a little bit more on top of it in these first couple of games.
Yeah, I like the way they've operated so far on offense, and I just like to see a little more. I hate to like make one-to-one comparisons, but I just like to see a little more St. Mary's esque suffocation from Seattle, and maybe we'll see that sometime soon because I trust Chris Victor to right the ship and make the right adjustments. But this was a big setback, and unlike their fellow cross statesmen in Gonzaga who took care of business against Oklahoma, I know we gave them a courtesy on their game, but I feel like we got to break it down a little bit more. Like they got on the Sooners and they didn't get off, and it was a thrashing from the jump. And you look at there's tears already starting to show up in the WCC and lots of teams that are earning their keep and others who are like, okay.
I mean, it's funny because I think like with Gonzaga, looking at that game, thinking about what they did to Oklahoma, it really feels like, God, these big major teams need to avoid Spokane Arena in that first week of the season. It seems like anyone who goes in there just gets the doors blown off. And I think a lot of it was pointed out a couple of different times on Twitter that of the kind of the reason you think about this Gonzaga team is an old Gonzaga team. Like all 5 starters are 21 and over. You have a couple guys who are coming off the bench who are 23 and over. This is an older, veteran, experienced Gonzaga team, and that depth is one of the factors that is going to play huge for the Zags all year long. And you think about the wars that the Graham Ike has gone through, what Braden Huff has gone through, what Tyon Graham Foster has gone through, what a lot of these guys like Adam Miller, Jalen Worley, like all these guys like have had tournament experience, have had high level experience and success at high levels. And I think one of the things that you look at this Gonzaga squad is that there's always a togetherness about that group. Like it is rare to ever see a Gonzaga team that is disjointed and does not look like it knows what it's doing on the floor. And that's exactly what we saw on night one, is that they were connected. They hit the ground running, and Tyon Grant Foster fits in like a glove. Like he hasn't even been officially allowed to practice for all that long, and he looks like he's already figured it out. Mario Saints Superi, as you mentioned earlier, like he already looks like he's going to be a problem, and it's only been a couple of games. And the fat and honestly, like I mean, we talked to Andy Patton about it last month about what his role was going to be. How many minutes is he really going to get? If he continues to play like he did the other night and continues to just get better and better, it would not surprise me if he ended up jumping Braden Smith and ended up the starter by the end of the season. Because I mean, Braden Smith, as good as he is, we kind of like there's a little bit of a ceiling to him and what he's capable of doing. We don't know what the ceiling for Saint Superi is right now. And I think that's as they get deeper and deeper to the season, the more confidence he gets, the more comfortable he gets in the system. And that's the other thing. He also hasn't been in the system for very long because he came over later than a lot of everybody else. And Braden Smith has had a full year in the system. He was with them last year, redshirting, so got the practice in the system, learn behind Ryan Nemhard. Uh, this becomes a very scary team, if especially thinking about Tyon Grant Foster and Mario Saint Superi, if they can really kind of hit that next level and figure out what their place is quickly in this offense and on this team. I mean, I kind of thought the Zags were kind of a second weekend team right there in the mix once again, and I think this kind of just solidifies really what they're capable of.
And I think a lot of complementary players too that are helping out because we talked about lots of good players who can become great. And I think Tom Grant Foster solves a lot of those problems. So I'd like to see how his acclimation period continues. I like what Jalen Worley has done in his stint so far. I think that's something that you'd see him playing up to the not to the one-to-one level of EK and Huff, but in terms of what the Zags need, I think Jalen Worley has done more than his job. And I think it eases the burden off other guys. That eases the burden off Steel Venters. It eases the burden off Emmanuel Innocenti, that they can just do what they do. They can focus on multiple tasks still, but not necessarily be expected to do everything and shoulder everything. Like I talked about, Steel Venters, can he be the guy that shoulders all the 3-point expectations? Now, with the way that the roster's flowing out and some of the way they've been punching up and down, he doesn't necessarily have to do that right now. So I think that those are really the bigger takeaways I have for Gonzaga is they're not forcing guys to be who they aren't. And I think that's been a hallmark of what Mark Few. He knows how to push the right buttons at the right time. And so far, so good from them. And I'm intrigued to see how it kind of continues throughout this non-conference.
Yeah, I mean, this week is a big week. We'll get into a little bit. They have Creighton on Tuesday night. They're going to have Arizona State down in the desert on Friday. So we'll get into a little bit about the Zags week, because then they have this a really tough week. They get Southern Utah after these two, and then they're going right into the Players Era tournament after that. So this is an important week for the Zags with a little bit of a break, and then they're going to hit the toughest part of their non-conference right after that. And I mean, we talked about the Zags, talk about where they are, and I think we have to kind of dive into what those power rankings are right now for where we're thinking these teams are. Obviously, like comparing where we thought teams were going to be in the preseason compared to where they are a week later, there's not gonna be a ton of difference, but at least there's a few teams that I think have like moved up and down our rankings. And I'm gonna at least start it off at like our big difference at the top. Well, not a difference that we have at the top, but a difference we share, and that's the movement of Santa Clara. We got to give them credit. Like the Broncos have gonna been impressive enough, that paired with the Dons not looking as great as we thought they would in week one. But the Broncos, I think, have shown that they're going to be right there in the mix early on.
And I like what I've seen. I was a little concerned at the start of the year who would kind of be the alpha dog on offense. And that question hasn't necessarily been answered, so to speak, but that's not a bad thing right now because you've had different guys stepping up. Obviously, Elijah Mahi, a big game against McNeese, but I mentioned earlier Sash Gavalugov, a big game. Can Brent Napper continue to do some very efficient things? Can Jake Ensminger, he's once again just having his hands in just about every cookie jar. If he puts it all together, my goodness, the amount of versatility that could come from a player like him can absolutely be season changing, at least from my perspective. The more you get offensively from Drake Ensminger, I think the ceiling of this Santa Clara team can go through the roof because I think you've already seen he possesses some of the best intangibles in the league. So I see that, I saw that, and I like that from the McNeese perspective. And they're facing a Xavier team that I think that's pretty vulnerable. So by the time you guys are viewing this, Santa Clara will either have just tipped off or after the fact they will have either just won or lost against Xavier. Xavier's they're gettable right now. I mean, they're Richard Pitino, the new head coach, coming over from New Mexico, and they faced, I believe, a very good Marist team. They snuck by them and then kind of had a blip performance against Lemoyne. So now Santa Clara, I mean, team giving the Broncos a bye game, man, that's I'm not saying you're asking for it, but I'm saying like there's something there for the taking for the Broncos, and we'll see if they can get it against the Musketeers.
I mean, yeah, I mean, Santa Clara, that is the one team I think that we also knew looking at the non-conference, there was a chance. It was a matter of how quickly they could put it together. And I agree. I don't think that they have figured out who the guy, quote unquote, is. But I think that's right now kind of a good thing because you have a lot of guys who are able to kind of step in and almost it's like you actually had the analogy about this team before the year that kind of like a little bit of the box of chocolate team because you never know what you're going to get. Honestly, I don't know who's ever going to be the leading scorer of this team because I there's probably like 6 or 7 guys who are the candidate to be that person on any given night. And I think right now that's a good thing for Santa Clara that you don't necessarily know who it's coming from and that there's some depth to that. The fact that they're doing this without Garrick Normand, they're doing this without Chris Taggio, and we'll get them back at some point.
And Bukia Boye played all of 1 minute in the opener.
Right. It's like you look if they can get some of these wins early on, being shorthanded, when they become fully healthy later on, and assuming they don't drop a game that they shouldn't, this is a Santa Clara team that could very quickly end up back into the mix with everybody else. And I think a lot of the concern, a lot of our trepidation before the year was we just didn't know what the Santa Clara team was going to look like and how these pieces were going to fit because you had a lot of unproven talent. There wasn't a whole lot of game tape on most of these guys. And now we're starting to see kind of some of that come to fruition. And that's a good thing for the Broncos. Another one that I think like I kind of jumped up my power rankings a little bit. And we both did it. Like we both jumped up LMU. Like we both had to. Like the way LMU has played week 1, I don't think there was a way around that. The Lions have looked good offensively, better than I thought they would early on. Defensively, they've still been right there. Now they're going to have to hit the road and do it at UTEP. They're going to have to continue doing it. But right now, especially when you think about what some of the other teams in the league have been doing, like LMU clearly was the one that got not only did they do their own work, but got some help throughout the rest of the conference to help them bump up.
Yeah, I think Stan Johnson and company deserve credit for executing because that's the one thing we were questioning about them. Like, where are they going to find a way to have the consistency to be a team that's worth it in the mid pack and find a way to stay in the mid pack? I know I was very low on the LMU stock entering the season. You were higher than I was on that, but I think, like you mentioned to start with, the Lions deserve credit for what they've done. I hope they continue to do it, and maybe in the vein of Portland, maybe they're not here to prove us wrong, but prove themselves right. So I'm intrigued to see what the Lions do, and I really hope that the reason we continue to talk about them is because they're actually turning the corner, not because they had a flat tire while wrecking on the freeway. So we'll kind of see what happens in that regard.
Now we have this is like toward the bottom is where we kind of start to have a little bit of some diciness because we both moved Portland up. I think like we talked about just again, there's a 3-0 start. They deserve a lot of credit for that. But some teams were slipping pretty quickly based on results. Both of us had Washington State. Yours is a little lower than mine, but then the other team, we have not talked about them once. San Diego, I also slipped all the way down because this is the San Diego team. When you lose a home game to Idaho State, a team that is really down, like really should not have any business beating any WCC team. That's a troublesome note for a team that on paper looked like it had made some improvements.
Yeah, we expected a lot better, and we still do. I think the reason why we moved him so low is because you can't bring him off the hook. This isn't last year. This isn't, oh, we know what this team is. They won't be doing that much this year. We expect more, and I thought Tonari Lane was having a solid start to the season. We don't know kind of what they're doing with KJ Bradley. There's been a lot of things that have been up and around this Toreros program, and I think the comparison I want to make is not even geared towards USD. It's geared towards Idaho State, because Idaho State in their opener at home was losing mid-second half to Park University Gilbert. In case you guys don't know where that is or have not heard of them, Gilbert, Arizona, the hometown of one Jalen Williams, NBA champion. But they're facing a team that obviously is not at the D1 level, and they are struggling mightily with them, and they end up winning by 10 points at home. And then they go on the road and beat USD. Now, how does that look? That looks so bad. And I think we didn't mention it, but now that we are, I think USD probably the loss and the manner in which they did so, probably a tier above Washington State for now, but I can totally be convinced to be put that on equal footing.
Yeah, those two I think are like the disappointments as of right now. Now, like because I I had a hard time because I couldn't put Pepperdine below either one of them, because like Pepperdine, even though they lost their game against UCLA, like they hung around with
They
the
fought.
Bruins for a long time in that one. That
Credit to
was
Javon
that
Cooley
was
for coming back.
yeah, Javon Cooley, Aaron Clark, like this uh Styles Phipps, don't want to include him in that one because all three of them played really well against UCLA. And I know like I don't know if oh, why am I blanking on name right now? It's like if UCLA wants to go ahead and have their head coach fire themselves one more time
Oh,
during this game.
a classic
Mick,
Mick Cronin press conference. Yeah, sign me up, please, right
no,
now.
no, he already tried to fire himself once when they did not play well early in the week. I'm sure he thought about it again middle of that game against Pepperdine. It's like, oh yeah, it's like, yeah, maybe I need to fire myself again.
Yeah, just do as you please. Mick Cronin, one of the best entertainers we have in college basketball. People don't give enough credit for that. But yeah, now Pepperdine, I do want to credit that fight. And while they snuck by in their bye game at home to start the year, this was an encouraging performance. I like the fact that you mentioned Aaron Clark and what he did, and Javon Cooley. I think the one thing I like to see from him, especially, is like how do you return to your confidence level that you once had after you come off a big injury? Because I think physical play is one thing, I think mental play is another, and I think that was a confidence encouraging and confidence boosting performance. And he mentioned at WCC Media Day, he's had the full support of his staff, teammates, and coaches to say, yeah, you can go be that guy that you were when we recruited you, and then some. So I was encouraged by Javon Cooley. I want to see more from it. And yeah, maybe now on review, I should have put Pepperdine over USD given the fact of all that, but they still got some time to prove me wrong in that department, or I should get myself into the right headspace to do so.
Let's say if they really get it going, got to start right in the waves.
I'll do it. Willie the Wave. I'll go meet him. Let's go to the Boo. Let's go. I mean, when the Mountain at Mullen opens, Zach, I mean, are we going to be there? Maybe.
Yeah, we're gonna have to make a trip down to Malibu and figure something out at the mountain. Now we're going to get into games of the week because we got a lot of basketball coming up, and at least there's a little bit of a breather. There's no games on Thursday, no games on Sunday, so there's at least a couple game days this week where there's no basketball. It's kind of like a little bit of a breather, but there are some key ones in here, and we've picked a couple that we want to each highlight. And I'm gonna, Thomas, I'm gonna start with one for you. And who's on the top of your list for games you're watching for this week?
The one I'm going to start with is one where you two-stepped with it a little bit, but we mentioned North Texas and what they're doing. They just came off of going into college football bowl season. This was facing the Santa Clara Broncos at Santa Cruz Bowl against Loyola Chicago, and they come off a buzzer-beating win there. But they face Oregon State, but that's not the game I'm focusing on. Oregon State, the team we've been focused on in terms of on the road, the Civil War. That is what I'm looking at. I think that's a really big test. Oregon has kind of been, they've been all right to start the season. They're obviously a very good basketball team, but I'm intrigued to see what Oregon State does because while Oregon is unranked currently, I think it's a good benchmark to find out what exactly do you have. July like the second on the road. I think that's a game where Des White. I want to see what this is. This is the type of game that you brought in Des White for. What type of firepower can you bring to him? What type of consistency can you get from Johan Munch? What can you get from Yak Yak? I think those are the guys I kind of want to see. Well, how do all the pieces kind of fit together? Maybe it's a Jorge Diaz Graham game, but when I look in terms of benchmarks and what we want to see from Oregon State, even though they have their undefeated record so far, I think the Civil War is a good barometer. And the other game I'm looking at is Creighton Gonzaga, and I think you look obviously Gonzaga and Creighton have had some very big classics over the years, both on the West and the East Coast. And I look at it from the sense of Creighton finally playing without Ryan Kalkbrenner. It feels like he's been there for about 10,000 years, and he is no longer there. Obviously, this is the battle of the Ryan Nemhard Bowl. So we'll see kind of how the Zags operate in that regard. I think Creighton, they got some guys too that I think will present the Zags with some dilemmas. I do want to see kind of how Grammy Kane, Brayton Huff navigating, especially defensively against Owen Freeman, transfer from Iowa. I think that's one guy I'm looking at, and Nick Graves, a guy who can absolutely shoot the rock at the guard position. So those are the two games I'm looking at. I like what I've seen from the Zags. I think they can absolutely win the game, no problem in that ranked matchup. But those are the two focuses I have. Beavers on the road, Zags facing another marquee non-conference team, and one where you know that Greg McDermott, that they're no slouch whatsoever.
So just one correction is the Beavs at home against North Texas. They were faced them last year out in Texas.
Yes.
This is the return game, but I'm going to pivot off of that because I'm going to take the back half of North Texas's West Coast two-step as they will be in Corvallis early in the week, but then will head to Moraga later in the week to take on St. Mary's. And this North Texas team, now it is going to be a little bit of a different look because they do have a new head coach, Danielle Robinson, coming over from Cleveland State. Their previous head coach, Ross Hodge, had taken the West Virginia job. But Robinson comes from a Cleveland State team where he led them to 3 straight CBIs. This was a team that has had a similar pedigree to that of those North Texas teams, defensive first, but this team might be a little bit more fluid on the offensive end. Even looking at like their KenPom number right now, like this is a team that is ranked 44th in defensive rank in the country on that side of the ball. And so this could be the test for that St. Mary's offense. All right, what do you look like against a better defensive team than you saw in week 1? And I do now. There's a clear advantage that St. Mary's is going to have in this one. There's not a single player on that North Texas roster taller than 6'9", so there will be a bit of a size advantage for the Gales. But that does mean that there's going to be probably a little bit of this. What's going to happen at the guard spots? You have a few more veteran guards that are going to be on the North Texas side. That could present some problems for Josh Dent. That could present at least some, experience trouble for Mikey Lewis. We'll see on that end. I think this North Texas team is going to present some challenges for St. Mary's as they start to look through this. St. Mary's played North Texas a few years ago. So it's going to be a different look for this North Texas team, but the fact that we're going to see that same team against 2 different WCC teams on the road, I think is going to show us a little bit more about what Oregon State is like, and then comparatively, obviously, then what St. Mary's is going to be like against a similar opponent. And there are quite a few teams that are opponents of WCC teams that are getting multiple chances at the apple. St. Thomas, of course, another one of them who's actually not only going to get game number 2 against a WCC team this week, but it will get a third crack at a WCC team in the coming weeks when they play Portland. The other one I'm looking at, because I need to see them put it all together, is Bradley when they head to USF. I need to see the Dons put it all together. This is a team that they should be able to handle at home. This is a Bradley team that now they've split their first 2 matchups. They lost a tight one at Santa Bonaventure, and then they just rolled Central Michigan. But this is a Bradley team that has consistently been kind of in the mix. They're consistently one of knocking on the door of either an NCAA tournament berth, NIT. They're always in the mix, and this is going to present a challenge, I think, for USF. This is a return game. They did play Bradley last year as well. Bradley, another one of those teams that has the habit of playing a bunch of WCC teams. And I need to see Ryan Beasley look like Ryan Beasley. I need to see Mookie Cook continue his solid play. We need to see if their rebounding is going to get better, if they're going to get a little tougher on the inside. We need to see if Guillermo Diaz-Graham is going to show more of the promise that we thought we would see early on. Because I will say there's nowhere to go but up after that first out. So what are we going to see in round 2? What are we going to see in this new week with Bradley? Now, it's not USF's only game of the week. That's later in the this one's later in the week. USF does have Portland State between the two. They should absolutely handle Portland State without a problem. But Bradley is going to be a challenge for this USF squad. The Dons really have to figure things out. Take care of the basketball. No more silly mistakes. Like, these are things that are correctable, that they shouldn't need another team that is going to hand gift them turnovers. They should be able to handle this on their own. They have veteran experience at the guard spots. They should be able to take care of the basketball better than they did the other night against Memphis. So if I'm looking at the two that I'm thinking about, I'm looking at USF Bradley. I'm thinking about North Texas St. Mary's. Now, as far as and I'll just throw in a couple honorable mentions. Troy at LMU. I think that's going to be another good test for the Lions. That's one I'm going to keep my eye on. And of course, mentioned it a little bit earlier. I'm keeping an eye on Portland at Wyoming and seeing what that could end up being for the Pilots. Can they continue in their only game of the week this winning trend that they have, move to 4-0? If they're able to move to 4-0 on the road in Laramie. I think that's going to say a lot about what this Pilots team is going to be moving forward.
I agree fully, and I think it's something where I feel like if Portland does that, I see Shante Legans as one of the best motivating personalities in this conference, and I think that's something that he can really latch onto. And we've seen kind of how towards the end of the regular seasons in years past, where Portland is playing its best basketball. I think when you kind of front load it and see if Portland can get over the hump at Wyoming, I think you can see Shante take that and make it into a force for good to make Portland be a little more consistent in this non-conference. So I look at that not necessarily as a jump off pad, but I think of the Wyoming game as kind of a science experiment, so to speak. If Portland can win that game, I'm intrigued to see kind of the winning combination that Shante Legans can cook up going forward. And I think one of the other games I do want to look at, we've talked about it a little bit already, Santa Clara Xavier tonight as we record this, and you'll kind of see the Broncos. If they can win that game, there is a world where they can go on a little bit of a run where they can get to December 6th at New Mexico at the Pit. And I don't want to count my chickens in terms of the Acrisure Invitational, but let me make sure I do my math right here. They could be 9-0 entering the Pit in New Mexico if they can win tonight. There is a runway to do that. Now, are the Broncos consistent enough to do that? Years past have told us no, but it's something that is on the table. Only if they get by tonight. A big win against the Big East would be big time. So I'm intrigued to see what happens with the Broncos tonight and going forward, because there's some inviting teams. Nevada, beatable. We talked about the boogeyman, Idaho State, beatable. The Acrisure, St. Louis, Santa Clara beat them last year. And then Stanford and Minnesota, they can beat Stanford, Minnesota. I'm intrigued to see what Nico Medved's doing there. And then, of course, the Jalen Williams jersey retirement night against Utah Tech. So the Broncos have a runway here, but will they be taking off at the correct speed?
Yeah, there is a little bit of an opportunity here for Santa Clara. And then I think the one other note I will put in, because I should have said it actually initially, because you brought up Oregon State, which will be next Monday on a day which we record. So we'll see if we can get how much of that we'll get in. LMU is going to be heading up the coast to Santa Barbara to take on the Gauchos. I think that's another one to really keep an eye on, as they will see our old friend Aiden Mahaney in Santa Barbara next week. So that's another one, as there's a lot of hype for that Santa Barbara team. Can LMU go in on the road and play well in that building and maybe steal a win to get out of Santa Barbara County?
Yeah, I like it. That's a good SoCal matchup, and I think when you look at probably one of the more underrated, consistent teams, not only in the Big West, but kind of just year over year, UC Santa Barbara, Joe Pasternak. I think they run a really solid program there, and I think if Aiden Mahaney's hitting some clutch shots at the end, I think there may be some PTSD flaring up from certain fan bases, and we'll see if LMU can get over that hump or if they become another one of those past Aiden Mahaney victims.
I was just trying to do the math. Was Aiden Mahaney on that team? Was Aiden Mahaney on that St. Mary's team that lost to LMU at
I think
LMU?
they were. I think he was. I want to say he was.
Trying to do the math on that one. That was 23. No, I think that was year before Aiden Mahaney. Because we're actually, hold on. Last year, UConn, 2 years. Are we 3 years removed from Cam Shelton?
So wow, we're doing this on the fly here, ladies and gentlemen. So I think I genuinely believe that was freshman year Mahaney. I genuinely do believe that.
All right, I almost need that. All right,
Here we go. LMU 78, St. Mary's 74. Let me have the date here. February 9th, 2023. And in the box score, Logan Johnson, Aiden Mahaney, Alex Dukas, Kyle Bowen, Mitchell Saxon, with Josh Jefferson.
So who's the one with real PTSD here?
Well, no, I don't know. Maybe it might be me, quite honestly, considering what St. Mary's did to Santa Clara in the NCAA in the WCC tournament. But just in general, I'm trying to go back. Oh yeah, Cam Shelton, a nice 31 burger in overtime against Aiden Mahaney and the Gales.
Nope. The year where LMU did the impossible and beat Gonzaga, St. Mary's, and BYU all in the same season, and it will never happen again.
That is true. That is history for the Lions, and lest we not forget about it.
All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Be sure to follow along on social media at unofficial WCC pod. Be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to the podcast. That's Thomas. I'm Zach. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will catch you later.